I'm Stephanie, and today I'm creating a cover version of the Danessa Myricks Lightwork VII palette. I say cover version instead of dupe because, as lovely as all the colors and finishes and textures in that palette look, I'm not entirely sure I would get a lot of wear out of several of the shades in that palette. And at $128 US, I feel like I should be getting a lot of use out of each individual shadow in there to make it worth it. So I thought what I would do is try to create a version of the palette that's very strongly based on the Lightwork palette, but kind of tweaks the colors so that they're a little bit more wearable for my preferences and my coloring. One of the reasons I want to do this is because I cannot get this palette out of my head. My makeup monster is just obsessing over it. And the last time that happened to me was with the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes Nature palette. I was convinced that I was going to break down and buy that one until I threw myself a swatch party and I created my own cover version of the palette that was more suited to my own preferences. And once I realized I had my own version of the palette that was even better for me already, I lost all interest in buying the original. So if you want to see that video, I'll link it here and in the show notes in case you want to watch it after. But I'm hoping that the same thing will happen if I try to dupe this Lightwork VII palette. So let's get this swatch party started. If you see me looking in this direction at all, that's just where I have my reference material pulled up. So I have the shade descriptions from the Danessa Myricks website, but I also have some great video footage of the swatches from Patty Alonso and Alicia Archer, who both reviewed this palette. So I'll make sure to include their videos below in case you want to check them out. The first mini palette we'll take a look at is the warm neutrals, and the first shade is called Golden Child, which is described as an opal white with a gold to green shift. I'm going to be honest with you, I have been swatching my shadows for a couple of days because I was playing with the idea of making this palette. So I have a couple of shades in mind, but I have to tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to match all of them because I just don't own them. But I do, in this case, think I have something that at least goes in this direction, and that's in this palette. This is just a bunch of singles that I pulled from larger palettes because I realized I was reaching for them all the time. So this is just kind of a random everyday palette for me, and this shadow here is from a ZC Cosmetics palette. It's been discontinued, but it is a golden champagne shade that has gold flecks in it, but also a little bit of green. The green is very subtle, but it is there. And so I think this might be the closest one I have. But I do have one other option that I'd at least like to include for the time being because I think it might end up working in the context of the larger palette, even though it doesn't perfectly fit the brief, because it is not technically an opal white with gold to green shift. It is more of a classic champagne, and it even actually leans a little bit pinky. So it's not exactly the same thing, but I'm wondering if it might work better in concert with the other colors. This is an old Too Faced shade from, I believe, the original Natural Eyes palette. The next shade is called Sand, and it's described as a neutral sandy beige matte. And so I was thinking about taking this blend shade from the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Shade number 3 is called Rooted, and it's described as a baked terracotta brown matte. And I tend to like things that lean a little bit less orange, and so I chose a more neutral matte, but that kind of goes in that direction, and I just took it out of my Viseart Neutral Mattes palette. I think it's going to be relatively easy for me to find pretty fitting colors within my own singles collection in this first palette, and also the mini palette too with the wearable taupes and plums, just because those are the colors that I naturally gravitate towards anyway, so I tend to have more versions of those. So for example, when it comes to the shade Warmth, metallic copper with gold to pink shift, I think I actually have several versions of this. I found some from Viseart, and I've swatched them here. And I do like them. In fact, I was considering taking the less saturated version, but I decided against it, and I decided instead to go with the shade Palladium from the Natasha Denona Bronze palette because it's one of my favorite bronze shades that has ever been made. In fact, it's so good that I took it out of the bronze palette and I just put it into my everyday little palette because I like it so much. It's an easy shade to wear because it's not very saturated. It's a much more muted shade of bronze. So even though it does have some gold and some pink to it, it's a little bit murkier. There's almost like a little bit of gray added in there, and it just makes it very easy for me to wear. And so I ultimately decided that I would go with this one for this palette. Even though it is a little different than the original, I think it might actually suit my taste better. Then we have the shade Enchanted, which is described as a smoky chartreuse with a bronze shift. And I have a couple of different chartreuse shadows in my collection, but I wouldn't describe any of them as smoky. So in order to get a smoky color, I would have to combine them with another shadow. But I think I'll be able to do that with the other shades that I put together in this palette. So I thought I would look for something that's more straight up chartreuse, but maybe with a shift, because this one has a bronze shift. And the first color that I actually thought of was the shade Macchia from the Natasha Denona Yucca palette, but that one is a little bit too straight up green for me, and it's also not necessarily light enough for me because I'm thinking about using it as a lid shade, and because I have such deep set eyes, it really helps when I use lighter shades on the lids because it brings my eyes forward and makes them pop a little bit more when you can even see my lid space because my eyes are also kind of hooded. So instead, I thought I would choose a more dimensional complex color from Clionadh Cosmetics, one of their glitter multichromes, in the shade Emboss, because this one does have something chartreuse about it, but it also has a color shift to it. I wouldn't call the color shift a straight up bronze, but there is something bronzy, pinky to it, something neutral in that shift that I think really works with this neutral palette, and so that's why I want to include this one in there. This next shade kind of hurts me a little bit. It's Mother Earth. It's described as a forest green with an eggplant shift, and every single swatch I have seen of this looks different. It is amazing. Sometimes it almost looks like a gunmetal, which is one of my favorite types of shades, but then sometimes you'll get that green in it, but sometimes it leans more teal, and then sometimes you'll get that eggplant shift. It always looks gorgeous, but the thing I like about it most is that it always looks a little bit muted. I feel like that's somewhat rare for a lot of multichromes, at least the ones that I have. They're all a little bit more saturated of a color, and I tend to really like muted shades. So I feel like Mother Earth would be one of my most used shades in the palette because it feels like a wearable multichrome. If I wanted to do a smoky look, I feel like I could really use it. When I was mixing shadows trying to come up with the perfect dupe for this shade, because I would really like this one color, I realized I was going to have to pick a direction, because when I combined shades of all of the colors that I saw in the swatches, it was starting to get really muddy. So I decided to choose the gunmetal direction, and as my base I chose the Lethal shadow in the shade Rise from the Ashes, and then I chose a tart color. It's a little bit of like a tealish green color from the Pineapple palette they had several years ago. And the combination of these two gives me that smoky effect and that soft muted effect, but it also goes in the green direction. So I think I might be able to use these colors to smoke up that chartreuse a little bit and have some fun. All right, so the first sextet is already done. Of course, I have some extra shades in there. And once I go through and swatch these, then maybe I'll decide to take out one or two or change some things out. But for now, palette 1 is done, and we can move on to mini palette 2, which is the wearable taupes and plums. And we're gonna start with the shade Love Potion, which is described as a white rose quartz with a gold shift. This shade, I'm not sure if it's from Marc Jacobs or from KVD or from who, but I thought it might be good because it does have a pink shift to it. Although it's kind of hard to see on camera because the pink shift is relatively subtle. Now I do have another shadow that's kind of similar with a pink shift. This one definitely is from KVD, but this pink shift is a little bit more, I wouldn't call it intense, but maybe it's, I don't know, a little bit cooler, the color of pink. So it feels a little bit more intense to me, or a little bit brighter. I think I want to choose the warmer one because that suits me a little bit better. And although the pink shift isn't really showing on camera very well right now, it's showing more of the kind of gold champagne tone, it does have a pink shift to it. And it is a warmer pink. And so I just think that would suit me better. So the second shade in mini palette number 2 is called Guiding Light, and it's described as an antique pewter pink metallic. That sounds like a very complex color, doesn't it? Pewter and pink. I don't think of those together in one color very often, but I think I have something that at least goes in the direction, even if it's not the exact same thing. And the good thing is I get to reach into my favorite palette of everyday singles, which is great because that means it's a color I already know that I really enjoy using. And it is a shade from Clionadh Cosmetics. It is the shade Cathedral, and it is one of their pastel multichromes. Shade number 3 was pretty easy for me. In fact, the second I saw it, I thought of my Natasha Denona Lila palette, and the shade is Toasted, and it is described as a toasted mauve matte. And the shade Nude Mauve from the Natasha Denona Lila palette seems to fit that perfectly for me. The next shade is called Wish, and it's described as an iced pink metallic. But when I first saw the swatches of this palette, I instantly thought of a different color, a little bit more mauve-y, a little bit warmer, not so iced pink, more kind of like a warm muted pink, and that is the shade Helio from the Natasha Denona Lila palette. And because that's one of my favorite colors of all time, I figured why not put it in this palette? The fifth shade in this palette is called Spellbound, and it's described as a magenta with an emerald green shift. This shade looks so gorgeous in the swatches. It looks gorgeous when people use it on the eye, but I feel like both magenta and emerald green are just a little bit too deep and too impactful for my more muted tastes. And so I thought I would choose an entirely different, more muted version of this. Now, I don't have a muted version of exactly this shift, but I do have another pastel multichrome from Clionadh. And so I thought I would choose the shade Turret. And the reason I thought this one might be good is because it leans purple, but it's in a very wearable way for me because it is soft and it is muted. So I feel like it fits the mood of the palette, even though it doesn't have the intensity or the same color shift as the original. The last shade in this mini palette is called Open Heart, and it's described as an electric purple with a smoky green shift. And at first I thought I was going to go with the shade Livid from the Natasha Denona Lila palette because it's a beautiful muted purple and I'm all about the muted colors. So I thought, oh, that would make that color so easy to wear. But then I thought, but if I were going to buy the Danessa Myricks palette, it would be pushing my boundaries because it would have some of these more intense colors. And so maybe I should try to go outside the box a little bit. And so I decided, why not add both? I'll do the muted version and the more exciting version that's more in the spirit of the original palette, because then I can experiment in comfort and see what I like more. So I'll use Livid from the Natasha Denona palette, but also the shade Shard from Clionadh Cosmetics, their hybrid multichrome collection. This one doesn't quite have that smoky green shift that the original does. This is more of an indigo leaning purple and it has more of a teal shift, but I do feel like it captures the mood of the palette more, so it's worth including. And it is the closest that I think I have in my collection to what's in the original palette. Now we're on to mini palette 3, which is called the Effortless Cool Tones. And this is probably effortless for a lot of people out there, but not for me, because my undertones do lean neutral, slightly golden. And so the cool tones are usually a little bit harder for me to wear. They can make me look a little bit tired. But also that really intense, almost cerulean blue, it looks so pretty, but I feel like it might be a little bit much for me, at least on the daily. So we're going to see what we can do with this one. This is the one I'm probably going to change up the most. The first shade is called Northern Lights, and it is described as a smoky platinum. And I think I'm going to reach into my Natasha Denona Glam palette for this one and take one of the inner corner shades. The reason that I want to choose this one is because even though there's something platinum about it, there's a warmth to it, and I think that will help me make this more wearable. Shade number 2 is called Magic Moon, and it's described as a concrete gray matte. And in all of the swatches and video footage I've seen of this, it looks like a very cool blue-based gray, which makes a whole lot of sense because it's in an effortless, cool-toned blue palette. But it's not necessarily the best for my skin tone, so I thought I would choose a grayish shade that's a little bit warmer and thus a little bit easier for me to wear. And I'm going to stick with a Danessa Myricks shade from her Groundwork Defining Neutrals palette, and it's the shade Stone, which I think will just be easier for me to wear. The next shade in the palette is called Grounded, and it's described as a midnight black matte. And I think it was a really smart decision for her to put a black into a palette like this because using black as a base underneath multichromes brings them to life in a whole new way. So I think it was really great for the palette, but a black isn't necessarily the best for me because although I do use black shadows sometimes as liners or maybe to darken up a color just a little bit. For the most part, I prefer to tend to go into a dark brown just because that's what suits my coloring a little bit more. For example, today I'm even wearing just a brown mascara because it's just dark enough to bring definition to my face without being too stark on me. So I think I'm going to do the same thing here. And instead of choosing a black, I'm going to choose a dark brown. Once again, from the Danessa Myricks Groundwork Defining Neutrals palette, I'm going to choose the shade Bark. Shade number 4 is called Dreamer, and it's described as an aqua blue with a periwinkle shift. And I can tell you right now, I don't have anything like this, but I do have a semi-translucent highlighter shade with a blue shift to it. It's from that KVD Triangle palette, and it's the shade Sapphire. Shade number 5 is called Mother's Love, and it's that royal blue metallic that's so eye-catching, but is a little bit too royal for my blood, so I'm going to choose a more muted color. But I do think it's great that she included this shade with this name in the palette because the story behind it is that her mother gave her a vivid blue eyeliner, and that's what contributed to her confidence in herself and in makeup. And so I thought that was a great story, especially because my mother gave me an eyeliner in about the same color. So I was just like, oh, me and Danessa Myricks, we're like kindred spirits. But I'm going to go for something more muted this time, and it's also going to come from that Tarte Pineapple palette, and it's one of those kind of blue-brown shades, and I think it'll be more wearable for me. And the very last shade is called Star Power, and it's described as a molten silver with a dusty blue shift. Now, I have some silvers, but they tend to be a little bit too cool or too stark, and so I thought I would go with more of, I don't know, a burnished silver because I thought that might be easier for me to wear, and I thought it would still go with the cooler tones of this mini palette. So I'm choosing the shade Elysian from the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. So here's my version of the Danessa Myricks Lightwork VII palette. It's obviously very different than hers. It's more muted and it doesn't have the same textures or finishes. But something I've come to realize about myself is that if the colors don't suit me, it doesn't matter how amazing the formulas or textures or finishes are, I won't use them because I just don't enjoy the colors on me. And so I think that this palette has a much higher chance of getting used just because I think the colors are a little bit more up my alley. So why don't we play with it and see how it works? I decided I would try a blue look today because that's the colorway I would have been least likely to use if I had bought the original palette, but I think it's actually pretty wearable with the palette that I made, so I wanted to give it a try. And I have to say, I'm really happy with my color choices. I think the fact that I chose the muted blue instead of a royal blue, and the fact that I went with a brown instead of a black, also with warmer tones instead of cooler tones. For example, in that smoky platinum shade, I went for a more gold base, and I went for a slightly warmer version of the gray. I think those things just suit me better, and it just makes it so much more likely that I'll wear this palette. And I decided to top the look off with a liner. It's Urban Decay's 24/7 Glide On Eye Pencil in the shade Mainline. And I think the look came out really nicely. Like, I feel like this is wearable. Like, I could leave the house in this and not feel like a clown or feel weird because I feel like it suits my personality and my preferences and my coloring. Going through this exercise definitely showed me that there are some colors in that original Danessa Myricks palette that aren't ideal for me, and I definitely had some better versions of those things in my own collection. And I think that's the case for a lot of us because we tend to gravitate towards similar things, the sorts of things that we wear all the time, the sorts of things that suit us. And so sometimes it's best just to look at what we have first. But I also have to admit that going through this and creating this cover version wasn't quite as satisfying as when I created my Makeup by Mario cover palette, and I'm wondering why that is. So let's analyze it. I think the first reason is because I've tried the Makeup by Mario palettes before. I own the original Ethereal Eyes palette, so I wasn't necessarily super curious about the formula. Also, the colors of the Makeup by Mario palette, although they were beautiful, they weren't anything particularly innovative. So, there weren't super complex colors in there that I couldn't recreate. And so I think those two things are different because I've never tried the Danessa Myricks Lightwork palette formulas, and everybody always raves about them, and I have to say, they do look pretty special in swatches and in application footage. But I think the other factor is also color. because even though there are some shades in the Danessa Myricks Lightwork VII palette that I wouldn't wear every day, there are several shades in there that I do think I would wear every day that I can't recreate with what I have, even if I mix different colors. For example, that shade Mother Earth looks like a very muted but complex multi-chrome, and that's the sort of thing that would make a beautiful smoky look, and I think it's actually wearable too. So having something like that I feel would be really special, but there were other shades in there that I thought when they combined, they looked particularly good. There was one look that she created on her website, and the second I saw that look, I was like, I need this palette just to create this one look. And although I can probably get somewhat close to it with what I have, the fact is I don't have the same colors and textures, and so I wouldn't be able to get the exact same thing. Do I need the exact same thing? No. Would anybody else notice? No. Am I the only person who would probably know the difference? Yes. So I think it's just my makeup monster trying to make arguments for me to get a palette that I don't necessarily need. But I think another reason I'm still tempted by this Lightwork VII palette is because of its format. The Freedom palette format gives you a whole lot of flexibility because you can not only take out the individual mini palettes, but you can also take out the individual shades. And I've seen from experience how valuable my Natasha Denona palettes are to me, not only because the quality of the shadows is really good, but because they give me the ability to mix and match and make my own palettes. I mean, how many Natasha Denona shades were in here? And so I feel like a palette like the Lightwork VII would give me even more flexibility and add value to my collection in that way. Now, every once in a while, I'll get a comment from someone saying, oh, just buy it. You know you like it. You know you want it. Just enjoy it. And I see the argument in that. I'm not against shopping, but what I do want to make sure is that I'm not distracting myself from things I already own. And if I bought that Lightwork VII palette, would I get use out of these individual shadows? I'm not so sure. Maybe I would. Maybe I would combine that palette with this one and it would be a huge party. But maybe I would ignore this and I would just go for the new goodies. You know, it's one of those things where I want to get use out of the things that I already spent money on, because otherwise, what value do they have to me? So I have now come to the conclusion that yes, I want it, and it's okay to want it, but I don't need to buy everything that I want. So what I'm going to do is put this palette on my Christmas wish list, and if I happen to get it, that's great. And if I don't, I have this, which I think is a great substitute. So are you interested in the Lightwork VII palette? If so, what are your pros? What are your cons? What are you thinking about the purchase? Or are you thinking about making your own like me? Or did you already get it? If you did, tell me what you think of it. And if you think this was at least a near approximation of what it was, or if you think that I would like the original. If you enjoy beauty content that harnesses the enthusiasm of the makeup monster without always requiring a method of payment, then please like, comment, subscribe, and check out this video here. Thanks for hanging out, and to all of my patrons and channel members, including my Adagio angels, for making content like this possible. I hope we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.